Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Very excited to bring back a repeat guest. You guys love Maria. She's been on this show before, and I get so many awesome comments every time Maria comes on. So, guys, welcome Maria Urso back onto the podcast. For Maria, is this the third time? Three times, right?
I think this is my third one. Yeah, it is.
Three times
Third
a
one.
charm. So, hi, Maria.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me back a third time. I
So,
love these. I love the connection it generates.
yes, it does because of you, because you're freaking so amazing. So I run into Maria at Fierce Pharma Week or whatever it was, and she actually came to see me, and I wasn't at the booth. But so she sends me a selfie of her working the booth. She's like, new employee. So anyway, so we decided it was time to do a podcast together, and we're going to talk about scientific storytelling, which is such a huge and I think desired topic. Everybody wants to know how they can be a better storyteller. So, Maria, you want to do an introduction though before we get into it?
Sure, I'd love to because that might frame why I'm even here talking about scientific storytelling. I think the last one that we did, we talked about the interview process for an MSL, and then we talked about expanding your career. So, right now, I work for Exact Sciences and I direct our medical communications team. So, I am scientific storytelling every day, all day, in many different forms of media, and in every meeting, I feel like we're doing that. So that's what I'm doing now.
You are the perfect person for that. And guys, if you don't know, Maria's like super athlete, ran 12 miles, interview intervals, the whole thing this morning. So I'm a huge I'm inspired by you, Maria. Just your commitment to health and fitness and it's just like when you meet someone that like everything they do is awesome, it's inspiring. So that's what you guys are getting in this podcast today. Just want you to know.
Thank you. And the respect is mutual. I was just telling someone about you the other day and just how you've grown up this business, how you've been such a beacon of direction and career development, and the connections that you have fostered across medical affairs has just been tremendous. And so the respect is right back at you. And I have
Ah,
to say, I come up with half my scientific stories on those runs. So they're really important. And when I'm just walking, I listen to the podcast.
sweet. So let's jump into it. Like, why is this so important for MSLs? Let's talk about this idea of scientific storytelling. Let's just start there.
Sure. So let me first just talk about why are we using such a cute, it's almost a cute name, right? Like I'm a
Yeah,
scientist. Why are we using words like storytelling and making me think of
yeah.
a fairy tale? And the rationale is that most companies probably have a scientific communication platform or a scientific narrative. And depending on how much evidence you have behind your products, what it is how you're telling the story about those products. What's the narrative about it? What I find in the medical space or sometimes with MSLs is we get so absorbed in a data point. Maybe we have a data point that's a differentiator from competitors, or we want to drive this home, or it's the one you see when you walk into the booths at a scientific congress, that we get very almost tunneled and binned into data, and we forget about the story. And
Mm.
there's nothing around it. And it's so important that we're able to talk about the science and our products and the disease states as a story. Otherwise, people aren't going to remember it. It's just going to be numbers, it's just going to be data. And quite frankly, it's going to be boring and you're going to lose connection with people. MSLs are connectors. That's what makes you a great MSL. How well do you connect to the customer? And so if you're not able to take a good scientific data set or a good piece of evidence and turn it into a story, you're really going to lose that connection with the customer. So it's really important that MSLs or field medical or anyone really in the medical and even sales space that they become great and nimble at telling a great scientific story.
Well, when you go through like I got certified as a speaker, trainer, and coach, and one of the things that you learn as a speaker is that the best speakers are storytellers. So it doesn't matter if you're an MSL, it doesn't matter if you're a sales rep, it doesn't matter if there's an audience, whether it's two people or 200 people or 200,000 people, your ability to tell the story is what is going to engage the audience. And think about the best TED Talks. Like I love watching TED Talks and listening to TED Talks. And the best ones are when people incorporate some type of story that helps them to prove some type of point. You agree?
Absolutely. Think back right now, I'm thinking of the TED Talks. My brain went to the most memorable TED Talks, and I always remember the story. I might not remember the whole talk or what the lesson was, but I remember some of those stories. That was the most impactful part of it.
Yeah.
And the reason, I mean, everybody connects with emotion. We
Yeah.
talk about what is art, what is storytelling. It's eliciting emotion. And HCPs are people first. Providers are people first. We need to connect with them, and telling a story is absolutely the way to do it.
How did you get good at it? Like, let's talk. I want to talk about your personal journey with this. Knowing you, you were probably just born with it and it just kind of came out. But I'm sure you have just perfected this ability to do so.
I was absolutely born with the gift of gab. My dad used to joke that I talked the whole night while I was sleeping. I love to talk, but I know that there's three things that are fundamentally important to me. And the first one is trust. Trust is a really big thing for me, like with people, that they trust what I'm saying, that they believe what I'm saying. The second one is I want everyone to understand. When you're telling someone something and they don't understand it, I think it's because you crave that connection. And if they don't understand what you're saying, you feel like that connection's not there. And then the third one is I know that I could be very impatient. And so when someone's talking to me and they're not getting to the point, I'm like, oh, what's the point? You didn't need to tell me the first 20 minutes of that to get there. So when I put myself in that seat on the receiving end, I say, I want to make sure that when I talk to someone, they're trusting me. So whatever I'm saying is credible and they're not going to doubt what I'm saying. And I've kind of done my fact checking. The second one is that I'm relatable, that they understand what I'm saying. I'm not using too many words. I'm not going on and on and on and losing them in the process. And that they understand me, that they understand what I'm saying. So whether I'm giving them directions from point A to point B, or if I'm telling them about my work.
Yeah.
And I think most MSLs can relate to that. You're working on whether you have your PhD or your PharmD or your MD, and you're working on a problem or you're working on a research study, and you're sitting amongst friends who might not be in the sciences. They might be in a different field, and you're trying to tell them what you do, and they just brush you off and say, "Oh, whatever you guys do with mixing up stuff in your beakers," and that's so dismissive.
Yeah.
It puts you away. So you want to be able to talk about what you're doing in a relatable way that people understand.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I was talking to somebody this morning about the importance of being direct. Just different conversation, but the importance of having a message and getting your message across. And like we hear this term word salad. Like in this day and age, there's so much lingo and jargon and buzzwords that it's just like, just get to the point. What are you trying to say? So that's a part, I think that's a big part of this is making sure that you're not just getting overly creative and crafty and putting a ton of words into this, that there is a purpose and there is a framework. So I want to talk about that. Can you talk about like the components of a good scientific story? Like, is there a framework that you follow?
Absolutely. And before even saying that, I want to pull on that thread that you just said, too many words, too many words. We have so many words and we use way too many of them. And there is a true phenomenon, the dilution effect. We see it in pharma all the time. We see it even how ads are read. We put the most minor things at the end for the
Yep.
side effects because that's what people are going to remember. They're going to remember those last two words. And so when we give people too many words, we try, like we're trying to say so much to convince them of something, but we're actually diluting our argument. We're saying too many things. So the very first thing with scientific storytelling is to say, how can I figure out what the most important thing that I want to get across is, and really boiling it down to the fewest words possible. What are the 2 or 3 things that I want people to walk away from here? And that is it. So almost working backwards. And then you're going to frame your whole story around that. So say, these are the three either data points, the what's in it for patients, and mechanism of action. These are the 3 things I want someone to walk away from. But we can't just dive in with that because someone feels, like it's overwhelming, it's too much. So we don't want to dilute is the very first thing. But then we want to build it. And you want to build it like you would build a story. You think about once upon a time, there's this big bad wolf and he lived in a tower and there's this. You want to set up your characters. So in a story sense, you want to give a background. Why are you here? Why is this product even on the market? Why did we even develop this drug? So kind of put it into a frame. Again, very simple, very short, very concise. Then you have to address the problem. So what problem are you here solving as an MSL? So there is a drug that's existing, and drug A, you have to take it 4 times a day, but actually drug B, you only need to take 2 times a day. So now you're kind of putting that conflict out there. Then, in any good story, there's kind of like the good guy versus the bad guy. And so, you got to get behind somebody. And this is where you kind of can do some competitive blunting or market shaping. It's just saying how your product stacks up to what people are familiar with and who else is out there. Again, building up your good guy in the situation and then coming back to resolution. And that doesn't just come by walking in a room and saying, I'm going to tell a story about this drug right now. It's work. So if anyone's listening to the podcast, this is a great homework assignment is to think about how you're going to tell that story, how you're going to keep it brief. What's your beginning? What's your conflict? What's the problem you're solving? What's the battle look like? And then how do you describe the conclusion and the big fat so what? And then the other thing around that is, you and I were talking about this earlier, is party stories. And when you think of a party story, I'm not going to tell the party story that I tell to my girlfriends the same way I'm going to tell that party story to, like parents or, to my church friends. There's going to be a very different thing. Same thing with MSLs. You have maybe payer groups. Maybe you have to tell that story to APPs, or maybe you have to tell that story to a patient advocacy group. So you have to take that same story and be able to tell it to different audiences too. So that's a good homework assignment to take from here.
All right, so you guys, let's just take a step back a second, unpack a little bit of that. You guys have a homework assignment. So you got the framework, and Maria gave you kind of the components and what you need to do. So let's use these takeaways. Let's be practical and let's come up with your version so that you can start to practice this. But I'm going to put Maria on the spot because I'm dying to know what is your party story? You have to tell us the party story.
Oh, I love my party story, and I realize I've been telling this party story for a long time. But this is another thing that's important. Think about how good your party story gets the more you tell it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the first time you told it, you're like, okay, people laughed here. They didn't really laugh there. That went on too long. You had to refine it. You had to grow it up. So one of my favorite party story, and I'm going to tell it as short as possible. I was in the military. We've talked about this on some previous ones. And so when I was getting ready to go into the military, I was told, Maria, you volunteer for everything. You are such a yes person. When you go to the military, I want you to stand in the back of the crowd. Don't volunteer for anything and just keep a low profile. Just follow everybody, do what's told, put on your uniform and be done with it. So after we did PT the first day, I was a little bit nonplussed and I went out, I did my own workout and we go in the afternoon. The first day I am wearing my ACUs, so military uniform, top to bottom, and we're in the hot Texas sun and I get called in front of our 300 soldiers and they asked me to post in front. So I think I'm getting called out for something and, yes, sir. And they say, Captain Urso, was that you that I saw running this morning? It's like, yes. And they said, that was after PT. I was like, yes, I know. And like, that shows discipline. That shows dedication. That shows leadership. You are our new class leader. I wasn't even there for 3 hours. And I went from don't volunteer to now you're the class leader. So
Yeah,
they
you
stick me in
did.
front of 300 people. I know nothing about DNC, nothing to do with military leadership. I truly wore my uniform for the first time that day. And I said, what am I supposed to do? They said, call everyone to attention, give them the orders, and we're marching this way. I didn't know how to do this. So I just channeled what I did know. Again, we go in. And so I jump in front of everyone. And I said, the other thing is you have to fake it till you make it, right? So I'm going to put on my outside voice. I'm going to assume leadership. I'm going to be this strong, resilient woman in front of these 300 soldiers. So I scream out, company, and they yell back, platoon. And I'm like, I've nailed it. Look at me, like Captain Urso. Here we go. And then I go, 10 hot. And all I see, because there was a lot of prior enlisted, I just see like a rippling of like laughter, like someone unplugged the power. They're kind of saluting me, and everyone's looking at me with doubt. And then all of a sudden, the major comes flying down. He's like, Captain Urso, how many Hollywood movies have you been watching? We say attention here. 10 hut. What is this 10 hut? And I was just trying to mimic what I
Yeah,
saw.
of course.
So my nickname for the rest of history in officer basic training was 10 hut. And I'd walk by people and they'd go, 10 hut. Yeah. So that was basically it was hilarious though. I
Uh,
even tell that story. You know when you get that panic attack where you get completely hot?
yeah.
Where you Yeah, that's what happened. It was
Oh
remarkable.
man, that's just awesome though. That's such a great story, but that's such a great example of a real story that had like a high and a low. It was vulnerable. There was so much to that.
How about your story?
What's that?
Now we need your story.
My story is I this is not my story's not suitable for this listening audience. There's gonna have to be an adult version. No, I'm kidding. Well, you know what I want to do before we get to my story? I want to hear now that we heard, and what I love about you telling that personal and vulnerable story, being able to incorporate that into any audience, any environment, because you could take that and you can pivot into so many different things. But can you give an example of a scientific story for a KOL or a story that you had to weave into an internal meeting or discussion so that the listeners can hear, because that's an awesome story, but like, what's a good MSL story?
Yeah, I find that one of the most important stories for every MSL to be able to knock out of the park, whether they're talking to a sales training, whether they're talking to a provider, is the mechanism of action of your product.
Okay.
Being able to talk about that mechanism of action and again as a story that people are almost visualizing it with you. They're getting it. They understand where you're going, whether it's a diagnostic test, whether it's a pharmaceutical drug, whether it's a device, being able to break down exactly how that product works, but not using jargon, not using, you know what receptors these are. You may know what signaling pathways they act on, but that doesn't really mean a lot to a provider. Think of how many different drugs they work with that work on so many different signaling pathways. So the challenge is, and this is where I see people like, oh my gosh, Maria, like that's the clearest I've ever heard that presented. You just need to break it down and be able to talk about how that product works in the most relatable way that you can tell that same story, at the dinner table to your entire family. So that's what I feel like is the first story for you for every MSL to master is how that product is working without using jargon.
Awesome. I love that. All right, I'll tell my story. I thought of this, but I wasn't gonna tell it because but I kind of feel like it's kind of funny, but it's a true story. So, and it was fairly recent, but one of the things, and when I'm coaching MSLs and trying to mentor people, I talk about how important it is to lean into your own level of confidence and just own your shit, right? So I it takes a while to be really super comfortable in your own skin, but there's things that help. So like working out, being in shape, being your optimum weight, looking your best, wearing your best clothes, that all ties into being able to really be 100% confident and just putting your stuff out there, right? So I had this wedding for a dear friend that I hadn't seen like a lot of these people in a long time. So I get all dressed up and, best watch, hair's perfect, teeth are whitened. I'm at the optimum weight, not just for this wedding. It just so happens that I was just feeling my shit. I was feeling good.
You're in a good spot. Yeah, good spot
So
then.
I walk into this wedding. It's the happy hour. I'm doing my thing. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this dude, and he's kind of like staring at me, not thinking anything of it. I'm thinking I know him from somewhere. It's a wedding where like, oh, I probably know him from somewhere. Comes up to me and he goes, this is exactly what he said. He goes, I don't know who you are. He goes, but I know you're someone. And then he walked away. It's like, what does that even mean? So then I later find out that it was this friend of mine's daughter's like boyfriend that I like grew up with. And
Oh,
so she introduces me to him. And then he says, look, he goes, I'm being serious. He's like, I don't know if you're an actor, a movie star. I don't, he goes, a senator. He goes, I don't know, but you look like somebody to me. So the whole rest of the night, everybody at the weddings called me, they all called me VIP. So every time they're at VIP, there he is, VIP. So the moral of the story is own your shit, be confident because people take notice.
they absolutely do. And that's the thing is, and first of all, that's hilarious. And you do that. And I love that because you show up with your best self. And that's what people know they're getting. Like, I am getting your best. You care enough about how you show up to me is to do that. Like, how cool that you showed up to their wedding in your best self. Like, that was the most important event that you were going to.
It's the
But
truth.
yeah, and but along those lines is, you know, that the practicing, you have to put the time in, you have to work on that. You don't just show up, and be amazing at it. And
Yeah.
same thing with that storytelling and refining it.
And that's a whole nother conversation of habits and priorities and values and being able to put yourself in that position doesn't happen the day before the wedding. It happens in all of the micro habits and commitments and priorities. So that's a whole nother, we could do that. That's the next podcast for us, Maria. Um,
Okay.
let's talk about like mistakes. Like what mistakes are you seeing people make as it relates to the storytelling topic?
The very first one is too many words, just saying too much. One of the things that most people learn as they start down the MSL path or they're in the MSL path is read a room, know your audience. And it's never too late to pivot. And one big mistake that I see is someone isn't reading the room, it's palpable, and they don't pivot. And
Mm,
that's why it's important to do the work, put the work in, as you're saying, like showing up to the wedding, like you know you're going to a wedding, this is the suit you're wearing, this is the story you're telling. But having different flavors of those stories and how to deliver it, it may be that maybe you went above the head of the audience. Like this isn't the information that they want, or you are prepared off and they were here, but you need to be here. So being able to pivot and not say, this is the deck I brought, and this is the story I need to tell, and this is the information I need to deliver. So being able to be flexible is something that I really think people need to work on, and being able to have a few flavors of that. There's a great book. Someone on my team read it, and they shared it with us, and then I read it, and it's actually quite short. There's a lot of pictures in it, and it's called Smart Brevity. And I think that's helped a lot in that area too, because it takes away from it helps you realize how you're losing people by either not reading the room, saying too many words, or doing too much. Another big mistake is statistics. And again, providers are people first. They went to med school because they want to make patients' lives better for the most part. So when you're going in there and you get caught up in statistics or a number or a data point, you are so far away from what they need to do at the end of the day. that they're not connecting to you. So again, thinking about how you're connecting with them and why does this matter to patients? Why is this going to make you a better provider in front of your patients is the second one. And the third one, I know you asked me for one, but the third one, and again, I think this can coach to not just an MSL in isolation, but this can be MSL team managers. This could be a cross functional thing. This can be MSLs working with commercial, is not being unified in those key things that we're talking about. What is the story that we're telling and not being connected on it? And that's a mistake because I've been in situations where, I've walked in to speak with a provider on the same day that a commercial person had been there. And the commercial person might have talked about something in this way. And now I'm talking about it in that way. And now we've created conflict about our own product. So again, being aligned is another one, and making sure you're in alignment with the company and the company message and with what other MSLs say.
Got it. Yeah. And is there a challenge to, I know that there are compliance guardrails and there's always that, the words of caution in making sure that MSLs are walking a fine line. So when being a storyteller, how do you stay compliant yet be creative, and still get your story across? Is there like advice on that?
And it's the same rules. The better you get. So the first thing that we talked about was not diluting your story with minor details and minor points. And when I find, working with MSL teams or doing listening sessions or sitting in booth discussions or one-on-one HCP discussions, those non-compliant terms or messages or slip ups, they happen when someone's going down the spiral. When like, and then this, and
Mm.
then this, and then this, and this. When you have a tight story and you're sticking to those main themes and those main points, it's really hard to veer off and to be not compliant. There's a lot more risk when you start adding in words and adding in more of a narrative and kind of going into those rabbit holes. So again, sticking with those major points, knowing your story, rehearsing the story, those complicated graphs that may seem, or figures that may seem intimidating, mechanism of action that may seem intimidating, the more you spend to unpacking it and saying, how can I explain this in a simple way? The less risk of having a compliance violation. And again, that when everyone is on message and everyone's saying a similar thing.
And how do you think, I know that, and we've had this discussion, but scientific storytelling can help the MSL be more relatable and create and help develop the relationship with the KOL better. You had mentioned like there's an emotional aspect to it. So can you talk a little bit about that piece of it?
Yeah, let me ask you, do you have like I don't know if your neighbors listen to your podcast, so you might not be able to answer this. Do you have a neighbor in your neighborhood that you're like running to the car in the morning and you see them and you're like, shh, shh, and you have to rush and make up a made up appointment just because you don't want them to catch your ear?
Yeah,
Do
totally.
you have one of those?
Oh yeah.
We all have one of those. And you know what? We can all be those people. So
Yeah.
you don't want an HCP to think of you as that person that if they see you as at a
They're gonna
congress,
duck
they're like,
you.
whoop,
They're pulling the duck move.
and they're pulling out, I gotta go, I got a really important appointment,
Yeah.
and then you go see them hanging out at the booth
Yeah,
stealing free
totally.
chocolate. Yeah. You don't want to be the neighbor. And so I think the way to really build that trust is, yeah, you have half an hour with them, but you don't need to pull out 30 slides. Pull out the
Mm.
ones that you can. And if you do have to, some companies have an end-to-end policy. You have to present all 30 slides together. Make sure you're walking them through that and you're telling them the so what. You've done the work where each slide you're able to say, here's my key message. Be respectful of their time. Be respectful of how many words you're throwing at them in respect, in relation to everything else, and give them the top level. Give them space to ask you questions.
Mm.
So just make be comfortable with just delivering your major message and your major story, and then just letting it sit and let them lead you on the adventure that they want to go on with that story.
That's great. I think getting back to the whole neighbor thing, it's, you start to develop this understanding and feeling of who's just going to waste your time or who's going to bring value to the time that you're with them. And
Mhm.
that's really that becomes the difference. And who's going to make it enjoyable? Like it might not even just necessarily be about value. You just might be able to make that person feel good because you're super friendly, or you might have a good story. You might be funny to that person. But being resourceful as an MSL, being a problem solver is going to
Yeah.
get you more face time for sure.
Absolutely. And making them feel important too. Make them part of the story.
Yeah.
Hey, since I saw you the last time, do you have any patient stories to share with me? Any breakthroughs? Were there any successes? Anything that really, wow, do you mind if I go share this with, my next appointment or somebody else? Or would you be willing to write a case study about that? So take their stories that they've had, the second time and the third time, because again, they're still people. Everyone wants to be liked. If you came in and said, "Oh my gosh, you did it. Do you mind if I tell your story to somebody else? Like, really, my story was that important to you that you want to go tell it to somebody else?" They feel good. And the next time I see you, you go back and go, "Oh my gosh, I was sharing your patient case study with Dr. Jones, and she said that she'd love to connect with you. Do you mind if I connect you to at the next Congress?" So now your little story, and you're asking them to share a story, you're bringing people together, and you're just feeding on those, again, those emotions that make people work together. You're showing some value.
Yeah. So what else are you seeing out there? Are there any trends or anything else that you're seeing? Not necessarily just about storytelling, but anything that you can share with folks that are listening right now that could help give them an edge.
I think there is so much information right now. It is
Mm,
so easy to create content,
okay.
and the result of that is we are just it's indigestion. We are suffering from too much information everywhere. And so I think the value is to be able to corral that information and to show that you can be concise, you can be clear. It's not just about more slides and different slide decks, and here's a podcast, and here's this, and here's that. It's how can you really deliver value in a short and clear amount of time, help someone get through the muck, help them get through so much information. I think a great thing is when I hear a misconception from a provider, rather than just shooting it down right there in the moment, being able to ask them where that came from, where the information is, what's out there. And then again, from that problem, solution, resolution, the next time you see them, say, I now know why you saw that. I saw something on TikTok, and then I saw this non peer reviewed article, and then there were all these comments that people put underneath. I understand why you feel that way. Help me help your peers who are seeing this and they're getting misinformation. How do we get around this? Kind of like we're working together. So I think the value is helping our providers navigate this massive, massive environment of information. It's just too much information, and they don't know where to go, and
Right.
they don't have time to go there.
Yeah. What about the future? Like, what do you see happening next?
Oh, the future. I'm not going to talk about AI because everybody else. I I think the future really is lying with medical affairs. It's just, again, there's so much innovation in this space. There are so many new product launches. We're in a great culture of startups, and while not every startup is going to succeed, there's a lot of startups, and yes, AI is part of them, maybe from the diagnostic landscape, but there's so much innovation. There are going to be so many more things kind of pumped into our medical pipeline. I think that it's going to have to be in the hands of medical professionals, medical science liaisons, medical affairs, largely because a lot of these are going to have to start to gain momentum pre-launch. And we can't have commercial out there doing that pre-launch, so it's going to be medical. So I think there's a lot out there. I think to position yourself is really understanding the technology, understanding the innovation, knowing what's next in your pipeline, even in your disease space, knowing what's next, from a drug perspective, competitor perspective. There's going to be a lot of competition and a lot of entrance, and just being able to stay ahead of that.
That's it right there. You heard it, guys. It's up to you, man. The future is medical. Maria
I think
just
it's
said it.
medical.
Captain Maria Urso, she said it to you guys. So you're the best, Maria Urso. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
Always
you for
fun.
having me on. It's always fun to talk to you.
That was great. Guys, thank you for your support. Thank you for joining this podcast today, and thank you for sharing it. So we will see you next time. I love you all, and keep those cards and letters and comments coming. See you next time, guys.